It's about 5:33 p.m. Our dispatch got a call. In fact, we got several calls from St. James indicating that a female who was in possession of a handgun was on the second floor of the building. And it took our guys about 2 minutes to get there. A number of our officers arrived within a couple minutes. When we arrived, one of the hospital staff was speaking to this female through the door. She had gone into an office, and what had happened was a female employee of the hospital went into the office, saw her, did not recognize her, and when they both kind of met eyes, the suspect pointed a handgun at the female employee, so she slammed the door, backed out, called the police, and let the rest of the hospital staff know what was going on.
And so she, okay, this was just an office. Can you kind of describe about where in the hospital this was?
Yeah, it was a fairly isolated area on the, I believe it was the northwestern corner of the building, near some of the administrative offices, who were, most of those were actually unoccupied at the time of the incident. So that was good.
Like third floor?
Second floor.
Second floor, okay.
Yeah. Which is actually the entry floor on the east side of the hospital. That's the second floor. You're coming in on the ground floor on the second side, but it's actually floor number 2. So our guys got there. There was the CEO of the hospital was actually speaking to the female through the door.
The CEO.
And he was relieved by our initial responding officers. The staff was evacuated from the area. They kind of isolated her in the office. It was fortunate because we had 3 of our tactical officers working, so they responded on the initial call. We also had a negotiator who was on his way home. He responded. Our on-call commander got there fairly quickly, so they were able to isolate her in this office. And it was a part of the hospital that was pretty isolated from the vital areas of the hospital anyway. So they started then talking to her. We had a couple of ballistic shields brought to the scene, so our negotiator could stand behind the shields and talk to her. The female was suicidal. At one point she passed out a suicide note to our officers, which is generally not a good indication. She would open the door periodically and have the handgun either under her chin or at her head, and she would indicate that she was looking to harm herself. She did indicate to our officers that if they attempted to come into the room, she would fire at them, and she also indicated that at one point she may try to make them shoot her in a suicide by cop type situation. So as our members were arriving, officers, we were able to get some heavier body armor to the guys who were near the door, and there was a couple of ballistic shields there that our negotiator was standing behind. And it started at 5:30 and it actually ended at 7:45. So we're looking at about 2 hours and 15 minutes. During that time, she alternated from being fairly submissive to where she again indicated that she was going to kill herself. So what we did notice, our negotiator noticed, is while he was speaking to her, she was starting to lose consciousness at some times and get very drowsy. So when it was isolated like that and away from the vital areas of the hospital, the emergency room continued to take patients. The floor nurses and the patients who were already in the hospital their activities were normal as well, so we were able to contain that situation in an isolated area of the hospital. So the hospital was locked down, although it did continue to function as normally as possible, even though there was an armed standoff going on in the building. It's a large building, and it worked well for us that she had isolated herself far away from the vital parts of the hospital. So when the negotiator noticed that she was getting drowsy, time was on our side, and it usually is in these instances. Eventually she got extremely drowsy. She dropped the gun a couple of times but would pick it up. And eventually she got to the point where she came out, put the gun behind her back, and was speaking to the negotiator through the shields. And there was an officer who was behind her that she did not know about. He was able to grab the handgun and end the situation safely.
Oh, okay.
Could you repeat that last part? How was he able to get the gun?
Well, she was talking to the negotiator who was behind a couple of ballistic shields,
Okay.
And then she had the handgun kind of handled butt first originally, and it looked like she was going to hand it to the negotiator.
Okay.
And then when he reached for it, she put it behind her back to kind of prolong the thing, I guess. And what she didn't realize, there was an officer who had kind of crept up behind her, and he was able to grab the handgun at that point and bring the situation to a close.
So she had walked out of the room on her own.
She was kind of in the doorway
Uh-huh.
and had kind of turned
Oh.
toward the negotiator who was behind the ballistic shields,
Mm.
and was speaking with him. He was trying to convince her to hand him the gun. She started to hand him the gun, she was holding the muzzle, and the grip was toward the negotiator, and then for some reason she put it behind her back, and there was an officer who she didn't know about, who came out of another office nearby and was able to grab the gun and take it away from her and end the situation safely.
Gotcha. How did she react once this was over?
Well, it was apparent that she was drowsy from the effects of some kind of substance that she'd either ingested or injected. And once I heard that, I was able to, the time is clearly on our side. She's isolated. There's nobody going in. She's not able to get to anywhere else. She can't escape. And then the effects of whatever drugs she's either injected or ingested were starting to take over. So, and that's what, there was a number of things that worked in our favor.
Do we know anything about her? Was she like a Butte resident?
She is a 49-year-old resident of Butte. No specific ties to the hospital. We're still trying to figure out what led her to the hospital. We don't really have any information on that.
Was she arrested?
She is currently in the hospital due to the effects of whatever drugs she's injected or ingested, and so she will be arrested upon her medical clearance, but at this time she's still in the hospital.
So you can't identify her yet?
No, I won't be able to identify her other to say she's a 49-year-old
Okay.
Butte woman.
And again, some people said, do we know any idea how she got into the hospital? Somebody asked me, how could she get a gun into the hospital? I'm sure we don't have it.
I don't know that yet. I'm not sure if she just came in the normal entrance and just happened to walk down this hallway and ended up in this office. I'm not sure what the circumstances are
So
as far as...
she wasn't there for treatment? Or we
No,
don't know?
not that we're aware of. No, she wasn't there for any treatment or didn't really have any tie to the hospital. She was just a person who happened to be in this office when this female staff member opened the door. So what the circumstances are that led her to this office, we really don't know at this point.
Did she put any thing? Did she try to block the door with anything? Or
She tried to block the door with a chair a couple times. She would open the door and put the gun under her chin and then to her head, and then she'd slam the door. And then the negotiator, who did a really nice job, was able to talk her into opening the door, and then she'd show the gun again. And but again, we were able to get some ballistic shields that the negotiator was looking through a ballistic window trying to talk to her, and we had some cover. We also had some officers who she didn't realize were there with tasers. And in the event, we got a decent shot with the taser to end the situation. That we weren't able to do that, but one of those officers who was in that position that she didn't know about was able to end it by just grabbing the gun when she came out.
Do you know what she'll be cited with when she's medically cleared?
Most likely, I would guess an assault with a weapon for the initial pointing the weapon at the female staff member from St. James, and then there may be some additional charges, because she did say she would shoot at the officers who were outside.
did she make any demands of any kind? Or
No, she didn't make any demands or anything like that. It was just that it was apparent that she was suicidal, but somebody who's suicidal is dangerous in that they can decide to shoot at officers or folks in the area relatively quickly. So that was a huge concern.
So, okay.
Is there any indication that the drugs that she ingested were part of the suicide attempt or a suicide?
My guess is that that's probably the case, although I don't know about that at this point.
She definitely was under the influence of something.
Yeah, and it actually worked in our favor, and there was a couple things that worked in our favor. Number one, she was isolated in an office that was far away from the vital operations of the department or the hospital. That was a big part of it. Easily isolated by our officers who responded quickly to the scene. So the hospital staff was outstanding. They got us some blueprints so we could look at the surrounding area, find out where our best opportunity was to contain the situation and end it safely. So we were able to look at blueprints, and we knew where the walls were and what the walls were constructed of. All those things are should be considered in any tactical operation. So it was a good operation as far as our initial response contained it. The hospital staff was outstanding. There were some administrators there who got us some blueprints, helped us with logistics of getting some of this heavy armor where we needed it, and it was an all-around excellent effort on the part of the hospital and our initial responding patrol officers. And then we got lucky in that where she was discovered was easily isolated, and then of course the effects of the drug that she had injected certainly were playing in our favor. And once she was contained, time was on our side.
And was it the decision, the hospital kind of, it locked down, but it remained operational? You guys didn't feel the need to evacuate? Who made the decision, I guess, to keep it
Well, the
going?
hospital CEO was there initially. I spoke with him. We both felt that with our officers there and the physical layout of the building, the way it was, there was no way anybody who we didn't want could get into this situation, nor could she leave the situation with this firearm without us stopping her. So, and it was far away from patients and far away from the emergency room operation. So, but when you talk about a hospital who, inside the building, there's an armed standoff occurring, and the hospital's still able to take emergency patients and function normally. It was a pretty good effort on the part of the hospital staff to keep on doing the things they need to do to keep that hospital open. Because one of the things that we all, as officers, we like to realize that we're going to take this scene and take charge of it, but that doesn't stop all the medical emergencies and car accidents and other things throughout the county from occurring. So to keep the hospital running and accepting patients while there was an armed standoff going on inside the complex, and it's a large building, so and again, that was the biggest piece of it. She was discovered in an office that was easily isolated and contained, and so tactically that was an advantage for us right from the start.
And you said this was on the what side of the building? East side?
It was on the northwest side of the building. There's a long hallway. There's an X-ray and a CAT scan department over in this area, but none of those services were being used. And in the way it ended, she was in kind of a storage office or kind of a break room type. And so, if those CAT scan services were needed, I think we probably could have actually used them by making it an alternate entry into that area. So they didn't have to divert any patients. They didn't have to stop accepting emergency patients, and it worked out as good as it could have. And in these situations, when you have an armed intruder that's intent on either suicide or maybe even suicide by cop in a building that's full of people, when everybody walks away safely, that's a success.
So did patients even know what was going on?
No, I don't think there were any patients that ever would have known what was going on. I know they may have heard on the loudspeaker there was a lockdown or a security situation in effect. The hospital staff themselves would probably be able to tell you that, but there was never any patients really in danger from the time we arrived. We were able to contain it quickly, and she had isolated herself, so it gave us a tactical advantage as far as being able to make sure she couldn't go anywhere else with the weapon. And then again, the hospital staff was outstanding. They were professional. Nobody panicked. They got us some blueprints. We looked at them, picked the places we wanted to be, and thought we should be tactically, and the time was on our side once she was isolated, and it worked out for the best. The negotiator did a nice job of keeping her talking until she basically became so drowsy that she felt that the best option was to surrender. And I don't know that she was actually wanting to surrender as quickly as we were able to take the gun away from her, but when she came out and put the gun behind her back, she didn't realize there was a guy behind her, and he was able to take the weapon away from her. And so
she was a little bit outside of the room.
Just a little bit. I think she still was partially in the threshold. I think she was kind of debating whether or not to go back in the room, or whether or not that it was time to actually bring the thing to a successful ending. And so we just were able to, via the officer getting behind her was obviously critical, and the negotiator being able to keep talking to her during the situation.
Was the room was there only one way in and out?
Only one way in and out of the room.
Okay.
And then again, it was in an area where there was really none of the offices or rooms in the area were occupied. But again, the fact that we were able to look at the blueprints and confirm all those things, there's no way out. Where the electrical situation is, if there's electrical equipment or gas lines or any of those things that would concern us in a situation like this, we were able to look at those things and determine that she was in as good a location tactically as we could have put her, and that worked in our favor. And we're all fortunate that she was in that isolated area.
What kind of gun? Handgun?
It was a Ruger semi-automatic 45 caliber pistol, and was loaded, one in the chamber and then other rounds in the magazine.
Wait, can you repeat that?
A Ruger semi-automatic 45 caliber pistol.
Not a revolver.
No,
Automatic.
semi-automatic, yeah.
Do you guys have any idea what kind of drugs she might have been in the influence?
No, we're not sure right now what type of drugs. I'm sure the hospital knows because they've tested her for so they can treat her for whatever drug was affecting her, but I don't have that information right now.
Had you guys dealt with her like any time before? Did she have any police contact before this incident?
Not that I'm aware of. This
Okay.
wasn't a name that I'm familiar with. I haven't looked as in other situations, but I'm not aware of any other additional
So we knew
incidents.
of no other disturbance like earlier that day, or she wasn't there.
Not that I'm aware of, no. I'm not aware of anything that was ongoing that day and just led to this
Just
situation.
kind of happened suddenly.
Yep.
When that female staff member walked in what way was she threatened?
This suspect pointed the 45
Okay.
caliber weapon right at her face.
Was she close?
I don't know what she would have had to be pretty close because the office
Yeah.
that she was in wasn't very big.
Was
so-
it small? Okay.
Yeah, it was
Is there an officer on duty now guarding the door, or do you guys just let the hospital security guys take care of that? Or
You mean as far as the patient?
Right, the
Yes.
patient, right.
The suspect is guarded by one of our officers currently. Yeah, and
Okay,
anytime
she's still
we
at
have,
the hospital being
yeah,
treated.
she's still at the hospital. But anytime we have a felony charge pending or felony offender in the hospital, we guard that inmate ourselves. And she wouldn't be considered an inmate, but she will be charged as soon as she's medically cleared.
Does St. James have, like, this would be a question for them, but do you know if they have, like, an active shooter protocol, or?
St. James does have an active shooter protocol, and I didn't get there until afterward, when our officers had already evacuated that area. But it sounds to me like the staff at St. James did an outstanding job prior to my arrival. So I'm sure they may be willing to speak to you about that. But it seems to me like the administration and all the staff who were involved in it kept their heads and did exactly what they were supposed to do. They do have an active shooter plan in effect, so I think that probably helped. They do train there, so again, they did an outstanding job as far as getting us where we needed to be logistically, and assisting us even hauling some of the armor we were hauling, because we had some officers tied up at the scene. So it went as well as one of these situations can go, and so we're fortunate for that.
Whoa.
Just real quick, how many law enforcement personnel were actually on scene?
I just looked at that. I think we had 14 total officers at the scene at one time, although we had to resume our normal responses to emergency situations as this thing progressed. So we let some of those guys go back on the street because there really wasn't a lot of space for anybody. We had the situation pretty well contained, and then we called out an additional patrol shift to assist those guys in responding to the normal emergencies and traffic accidents and medical emergencies and those kind of things that they don't stop when something like this happens.
Sure.